Shalom wa baraka, mispaka, peace and blessings, family. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the unclean issues of the flesh. This video is important because there's not a lot of videos online about it, not a lot of Israelites talking about it, and honestly, not even a lot of Israelites even keeping it. So it's important for us to learn about this today. By the way, happy new moon. Hope you guys are keeping this Kodesh. Hope you guys blew up the trumpet today. But let's get right back into it. Leviticus 15 is what we're going to be reading from. We have to know this because we have to avoid all unnecessary uncleanness. Notice I said unnecessary because sometimes it is necessary to become unclean because it's impossible to be clean all of your life. It's not going to happen. But what can happen is to avoid unnecessary uncleanness. Whenever you don't have to be unclean, and whenever being unclean doesn't really fit into what you're trying to do, basically. That's the whole point of Leviticus 15. And it's important because cleanliness is a part of your connection to Yah. Alright, it's a part of your holiness. And family, people who got children out there, just so you know, whenever you go on to have the talk, quotation marks, the talk with your children, as an Israelite, as a righteous individual, Leviticus 15 should be a focus in that talk. Whenever your children body start changing, puberty, etc., you need to make sure you're introducing Leviticus 15 to their lives. Make sure you're talking about this to them, all right? Because after their body starts changing is when they're going to have to keep these laws. Make sure you're introducing these laws to your children at that time. All right. So let's look at Leviticus 15. Let's get right back into it. And Yah spoke unto Moses and Aaron, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When any man hath a running issue out of his flesh, because of his issue he is unclean. Verse 3, it says, And this shall be his uncleanliness in his issue, whether his flesh run with his issue, or his flesh be stopped from his issue, it is uncleanliness. Now look at this. This particular verse 1 through verse 3, or verse 3 in general, this is talking about any type of infection. Any type of infection a man or woman has, to where something is coming out of them, and it also affects the flesh of the body. It also affects the skin. It also has a negative impact on not only what's coming out, but it also has a negative impact on the skin. So that's a type of infection. Infection or disease, whether it be sexually transmitted or just you not taking care of yourself. So it's a lot of things like that. Whenever you have that, you're unclean. Let's keep reading. Verse 4, Every bed whereon he lieth, that hath the issue, is unclean, and everything whereon he sitteth shall be unclean. So anywhere this person with this infection or disease affecting their private area, everywhere they sit or lie down on will be unclean. Verse 5, And whosoever touches his bed shall wash his clothes, and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the even. So if you touch this person, So if you touch this person's bed, you should wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you're unclean. You're unclean into the evening time. Verse 6, And he that sitteth on anything whereon he sat, that hath the issue, shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the evening. So if this person sat down right there who has this infection, and you sit down right there, you are unclean. See, in captivity, we have a big problem to where nobody knows about these unclean laws. Nobody knows about it. And since nobody knows about it, nobody's going to say anything. But look at this. As us as being holy, righteous, commandment-keeping Israelites, it is our duty to announce to other Israelites when we are unclean. We do not have to tell other Israelites why you're unclean, but it's important to tell other Israelites when you are unclean so that they can stay clean and stay out of your way. That's common courtesy. Verse 7. And he that toucheth the flesh of him that hath this issue shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean unto the even. Verse 8. And if he that hath the issue spit upon him that is clean, then he shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the even. All these scriptures are just self-explanatory. Verse 9. And what saddle soever he rideth upon that hath this issue shall be unclean. Verse 10. And whosoever touches anything that was under him shall be unclean until the even. And he that beareth any of those things shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the even. And verse 11. And whomsoever he touches that hath the issue and has not rinsed his hands in water, he shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the even. Verse 12. And the vessel of earth that he touches with hath the issue shall be broken, and every vessel of wood shall be rinsed in water. In verse 13. So even the cups and bowls that this unclean person touches, if it's breakable, break it. If not, wash it. Breakable meaning if it's made out of clay or earth, break it. Washable meaning wood, rinsed in water. Verse 13. And when he that hath the issue is cleaned of his issue, then he shall number to himself 7 days for his cleansing, and shall wash his clothes and bathe his flesh in running water, and he shall be clean. So when this person finally gets rid of this infection or whatever's going on with his flesh and has something coming out of his body, whenever that goes away, he should number himself 7 days. And at the end of those 7 days, he shall be clean. Now let's just skip to verse 16. And if a man's seed of copulation go out of him, Then he shall wash all his flesh in water, and be unclean until the even. Now, if you don't know what seed of copulation is, basically your sperm. All right. If the seed, the stuff that makes a baby, comes out of you, you shall wash all your flesh in water, take a bath, and you will be unclean until the even. All right. And every garment and every skin whereon is the seed of copulation, so everything that the stuff got on, shall be washed with water, and be unclean until the evening. So everything that it got on needs to be washed in water and be unclean until the evening. Now verse 18. The woman also, with whom man shall lie with seed of copulation, they shall both bathe themselves in water and be unclean until the evening. So this means that the man and the woman, after they had just got through with sexual intercourse, and the man had, sperm coming out of him, both of them shall be unclean. Both of them should take a bath. They should take a bath immediately after and be unclean into evening. I don't know nobody's business at all, and I don't care to know anybody's business, but I can guarantee you that there's a lot of our people out here not keeping that commandment. Verse 19. And if a woman have an issue, and her issue in her flesh be blood, she shall be put apart 7 days, and whoever toucheth her shall be unclean until the evening. Now, what is this talking about? This is talking about a woman's normal bodily cycle. All right. Whenever the blood comes out of her, that's when she's unclean. And when she gets this menstruation cycle, as soon as she get it, she is unclean for 7 days. Verse 20. And everything that she lieth upon in her separation shall be unclean. Everything also that she sitteth upon shall be unclean. To all my men out here, all my men who are in new relationships with women, make sure you guys are telling your wives, or telling your courting buddies, or telling your girlfriends, or whoever you want to call it, to make sure you're telling them that they have to follow Leviticus 15, verse 18 through 22. Make sure you tell them that when they are on their menstruation cycle, that they should be separated for 7 days. They should not be in the same bed with you on those 7 days. In fact, they should have their own area so that they don't unclean everything that you use yourself. And this is actually really good for the new relationship or whatever relationship you're in, because people need space. And once you have space with your partner, the love builds. At the end of those 7 days, y'all will be clingier than before those 7 days, because y'all gonna miss each other. But that builds the relationship stronger. Space is very needed for relationships. When there's absolutely no space is when people start going crazy, when people start driving each other insane, blah, blah, blah. People need space, because the more space, the less arguments, the less fights, and especially when the woman's on her menstruation cycle. Space is a good idea. Israelite relationships who keep these commandments will succeed. Now, personally, what me and my wife did, we had a bed specifically for her. And that's how it's supposed to be. Because whenever the woman's on her menstruation cycle, she should not be in the bed that you guys both are accustomed to sleeping in, because that entire bed will now be unclean. Make sure you have your own specific mattress. We didn't have an entire bed. Just make sure you have your own specific mattress, at least, with some covers, specific pillows, all that, specifically for the separation period. And everything that she lieth upon in her separation shall be unclean. Everything also that she sitteth upon shall be unclean. And whosoever touches her bed shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the even. Self-explanatory, right? And whosoever touches anything that she sat upon shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water and be unclean until the even. Verse 23. And if it be on her bed, or on anything whereon she sitteth, when he touches it, he shall be unclean unto even. That's talking about the blood. Now pay attention to this part, because this part can be very confusing. All right, verse 24. And if any man lie with her at all, I want every Israelite to pay very close attention to this commandment right here. And if any man lie with her at all, and her flowers be upon him, he shall be unclean 7 days, and all the bed whereon he lieth shall be unclean. This is not talking about sex. When it says lie with her at all, that is not talking about sex. That's talking about you lying next to her. That's talking about cuddling. That's talking about you're just all on her, basically. If blood gets on you because you're lying too close to her, then you will be unclean 7 days. Do not read this scripture and say, oh crap, I can have sex with my woman while she's on her menstruation cycle. I'll just be unclean 7 days. I don't care. No. Big mistake. Because guess what? Torah also teaches if you have sexual intercourse with a woman while she's on her issue of blood, you should be put to death. That's talking about sex. That's when you cross the line. Is when you have sex with a woman while she's on her menstruation cycle. It's an abomination. Y'all hates it. And you shall be put to death. This scripture, Leviticus 15 and verse 24, is not talking about sex. It is talking about simply lying next to her. Verse 25. Verse 25, pay attention to this because it's also kind of complex. And if a woman have an issue of her blood many days out of the time of her separation, or if it run beyond the time of her separation, all the days of the issue of her uncleanness shall be as the days of her separation. She shall be unclean. Understand that this is not talking about a menstruation cycle. We are done talking about menstruation cycles. This is talking about a whole new thing. Leviticus 15 and 25 has started us talking about a whole different thing. This is talking about when a woman is bleeding in her private area, when it has absolutely nothing to do with the menstruation cycle. It said out of the time of her separation, meaning it's not even her time of month and she's bleeding, meaning something's wrong, whether it be fibroids, whether it be UTI, whether it be anything like that, abnormal bleeding, basically any feminine complication where she's bleeding out of her private area and is running beyond the time of her separation, or if it's outside of her separation, basically if it's more than 7 days, if she has been on her separation. Let's read. All of the days of her issue of her uncleanness shall be as the days of her separation. Then she should treat it like it's her menstruation cycle. She shall be unclean. Verse 26. Every bed whereon she lieth, all the days of her issue shall be unto her as the bed of separation. So if this woman is bleeding outside of her cycle at an abnormal time because of an abnormal reason, she should be on the same bed that she lied upon during her normal separation. Verse 27. And whosoever toucheth those things shall be unclean, and shall wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until the even. Verse 28. But if she be cleansed of her issue, that means if this abnormal bleeding goes away, then she shall number to herself 7 days, and after that she shall be clean. So after this abnormal bleeding has went away, she shall count 7 days, and at the end of those 7 days, she shall be clean. Like I said, this is not talking about a regular menstruation cycle, because some people read this and think it's talking about a regular menstruation cycle. So they have their regular menstruation cycle, and then they count 7 days after. Not how it's supposed to be done. Let me explain thoroughly, and let me explain thoroughly how it should be done. When a woman's on her regular menstruation cycle, depending on how long her cycle is, some women's cycle will last 3 days. Some women's cycle lasts 4 days. A lot of women's cycles last 7 days. Exactly 7 days. But if their cycle lasts exactly 7 days, then those 7 days are the only days that they are unclean. That means only 1 week out the month they're unclean. Only 7 days. If a woman's cycle is only 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, etc., still 7 days. Only 7 days. Only 1 week. However, if a woman's cycle lasts longer than 7 days, we're talking 8, 9, 10 days, then you got to add another 7 days because something is apparently off with the body. Now you got to add another 7 days. Now you're talking about a whole 2 weeks unclean or more, until whenever the cycle stops, whenever this abnormal bleeding issue stops is when you should count yourself 7 days. But if it's a normal bleeding issue at the right time, at the right amount of time, then only 7 days she shall be unclean. According to most doctors, according to, agreed upon health, according to agreed upon health science, the average and healthy female cycle lasts anywhere between 3 to 7 days. If it's more than 7 days, there's something wrong with the body. And if it's more than 7 days, she should count 7 more days after whenever it's done. And that's when she'll be clean. Verse 31. Thus shall ye separate the children of Israel from their uncleanness, that they die not in their uncleanness, when they defile my tabernacle that is among them. This is the law of him that hath an issue, and of him whose seed goeth from him, and is defiled therewith, and of her that is sick of her flowers, that's the menstruation cycle, and of him that hath an issue, of the man and of the woman, and of him that lieth with her that is unclean.
Now let's talk about childbirth, all right? How it affects uncleanliness, how you should deal with that, how you should operate with that. Leviticus 12:1. And how Yah spoke to Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, If a woman have conceived seed and born a man child, that means born a boy, then she shall be unclean 7 days. According to the days of her separation of her infirmity, she shall be unclean. And on the 8th day, the flesh of his foreskin shall be circumcised. So after you give birth to a boy, females, you shall be unclean for 7 days. And the 8th day, your baby boy needs to be circumcised. Verse 4. And she shall continue in the blood of her purifying 33 days. And she shall touch no hallowed thing, nor come into the sanctuary until the days of her purifying be done. Now, after she has cleansed herself, after the 7 days, after she is now clean, she shall continue in the blood of her purifying. It says 33 days. She shall continue in the blood of her purifying for 33 days. 33 days, she shall continue in the blood of her purifying. This means she's not unclean anymore, but she should still be set apart from the hallowed things. Her body is still healing. Her body is still purifying. Verse 5. But if she bear a maid child, then she shall be unclean 2 weeks, as in her separation. She shall continue in the blood of her purifying 66 days. 66 days is double for what a male is. So what is the blood of their purification? What is that? Their body is still bleeding. Their body is still healing. So sexual intercourse for those days during the blood of purification is off limits. Off limits for sexual intercourse or touch any hallowed thing, but you're not unclean per se. And you can still touch your wife, of course. You can still touch her clothes, and she can even lay next to you. And she can even sleep in your bed with you, because she's not unclean, but she's still purifying. So while she's purifying, her body is literally detoxifying. That's what the word purifying means. She's detoxifying herself. After you give birth, you are detoxifying yourself. That means no sexual intercourse those days. Because when you have sexual intercourse, there's more stuff going into your body that you don't need in your body. Your body is still getting rid of the stuff that built up within it in those days. Like I said, you're not unclean, but your body is detoxifying itself. Your body is healing. It's cleansing itself from the inside out. This I'd like to say, Shalom wa baraka mispaka.